Jim Forrest was a friend of Thomas Merton. Most of you probably have not heard of Jim Forrest. Thomas Merton, maybe more of you, just to remind you, he was that monk, that famous Trappist monk who wrote The Seven-Story Mountain and many other works, and lived in Kentucky at Gethsemane, at the monastery Our Lady of Gethsemane, I think. But he lived there, not far from us, and died in 1968. One of his things that he did was he wrote many, many letters. For a monastic who was supposed to be cloistered, he wrote, I think there's over 2,500 letters that are housed in a college in Louisville. But anyway, one of those letters is to a man named Jim Forrest. And Jim Forrest was a peace activist. He ran an organization called the Catholic Peace Fellowship that was still around, I think, and very active during the 60s, around the Vietnam War. And this letter is very well known, and in it Merton is consoling Forrest, who's become very overwhelmed by his work and by what he sees as the ongoing evil of the world. The world isn't changing. Catholics at the time, who were his main ministry, they weren't changing their mind, and he was getting fed up, And he himself was being criticized, Jim Forrest was, for their work. There were people saying, you're doing too much, you're too political, and blah, blah, blah. And so here are some of the words. I'm going to actually read some things from both of their letters. Here's some words from Jim Forrest's letter to Thomas Merton. I confess to you that I am in a rather bleak mood. For one thing, I'm exhausted with ideological discussions. Earlier today, I began to type out a few thoughts on the paper you wrote concerning protest. But the question kept coming up as I worked on this response. Who's even listening? And he continues, how is it that we have become so insensitive to human life, to the wonders of this world we live in, to the mystery within us and around us? And what can we do? What can be done? Who can we become that we are not? What can we undertake that we haven't already? I don't wish to sound despairing. I have by no means given up on the work, but truly I feel like an ant climbing a cliff. And even worse, in the distance, there seems to be this roar of an avalanche. There's no exit, so I'm not bothered to look for one. I will continue to work, and there are saving moments. There are saving friendships, the artists, and there is faith. And then he goes on and he asks Merton if he might have any words of advice. And after he gets the letter back, and in retrospect, he says the letter that he got back was the most important words that he had ever received. And so we're going to read some of those now. So Merton writes back, Dear Jim, I could well understand your sense of desperation and your bleak mood. And also, I'm glad that you wrote about it. As you say, there are no clear answers. And you can probably guess that I don't have the magic solutions for your bleak mood, or bleak moods in general. If I did, I would use them on my own, which are habitually pretty bleak too. And then this. Do not depend on the hope of results. When you are doing the sort of work you have taken on, essentially an active and apostolic work, you may have to face the fact that your work will be apparently worthless and even sometimes achieve no result at all, if not, perhaps, results opposite to what you expected. As you get used to this idea, you start more and more to concentrate not on the result, but on your values, on the value, the rightness, the truth of the work itself. The real hope then is not in something we think we can do, but in God, who is making something good out of it in some way we cannot see. If we can do his will, we will be helping in this process, but will not necessarily know it all beforehand. I feel like those words are one of the most perfect commentaries on our gospel passage about Martha and Mary, and that's why I quoted them so extensively. Martha has been much maligned, I feel like, over the years. I remember when I drove in today this morning, Bill Emery was in the kitchen, and I saw him doing something, and I thought, Martha, Martha. Jesus' words to her, and the way that we often repeat her name, Martha, Martha, they could be read like they're patronizing, right? Or scolding somehow, like, come on, Martha. But I think it would be a mistake to read the whole passage that way. In the Roman liturgy of the Eucharist, the Roman Catholic, especially in the older translation from the Latin, there's this thing that people say right before they receive communion. And it's, Lord, I am not worthy to receive you, but only say the word and I shall be healed. But the closer translation, the one it's actually a quote from Luke's gospel later on. It's a quote from the story of the centurion and his sick slave. And he's going to Jesus to ask for the slaves, for the servants' healing. And he says, Lord, and Jesus says, sure, I'm on my way. He says, Lord, I'm not worthy that you come under my roof, but only say the word and your servant shall be healed. The reason it's said before the Roman liturgy is before communion is because this idea of receiving Jesus into your home, this hospitality idea, Abraham's story also about this hospitality of dining with these three who are like God. This idea of hospitality is taking Jesus and God into one's very self. When we take communion, we take Jesus, the Word made flesh, into our very bodies and into ourselves. Mary is often lifted up as the hero of the story, and Martha becomes like this bad example. That's why I really think it's important to hear the very first words, that very first sentence of our gospel today, because it says, Martha welcomed Jesus into her home and under her roof. She is the one who extends the hospitality to the Word of God. So there is, in the 4th century, there was this guy named Origen. Not like origin, like the beginning of things, but his name was Origen, O-R-I-G-E-N. And he gives one of the first homilies on this passage. And he identifies he identifies Martha with the active, or what's also called, and you heard it in Merton's letter, also called the apostolic life, the active life, and Mary with the contemplative life. The Greek words he uses are praxis for action and theoria for contemplation. And for many centuries, his commentary became the basis for understanding the different ministries of the church. The apostolic, which is the going out and the doing of good works, the serving the poor, working for justice, visiting the sick and the friendless and the needy. And the other side was the contemplative side. The monastics, perhaps, monks, nuns, or just prayer. Those that may be cloistered, like the hermit. Those who devote much of their time to praying and chanting the Psalms. But Origen, and often later commentators would sort of put one above the other, like Mary is above Martha, right? But Origen understood it differently. He did not think Jesus was putting one above the other, the active life in favor of the contemplative. Jesus was teaching that our action must always be accompanied by our contemplation, and our contemplation by action. I think of Zen teachers who will say, when we think of Zen practice, we often think of sitting, on a cushion or something like that. But most Zen teachers will say the real Zen practice is in life. Martha, Origen said, was the somatic. That means the body in the world. And Origen thought that was essential. We can't lift up our hearts to God, as it says in our liturgy, if we don't have a beating heart. It's with our bodies that we approach the altar rail. It's with our bodies that we sit and pray. It's with our bodies that we, as Jesus taught last week in the passage right before this one, the Good Samaritan, it's with our bodies that we love our neighbor, and it's the wounded bodies of our fellow travelers that we anoint with oil and wash with water. But, as Jesus himself knew, and Jim Forrest learned, the woundedness of our world can seem unending. What progress are we making when we feel like we're constantly taking one step forward and two back? When the sick line up at the doors, when injustices are multiplied, when we seem to be rehashing debates that we thought were settled, when the creation floods and burns, when war and bombs and now fighting drones continue on and on. What's the point of this body, this life, and its work? So Mary's part, then, is the other side. And it is, according to Origen, not just about sitting in some posture and trying to concentrate on God alone. Though it is important, I think, as an aside, I'm just going to make a little side here. Luke is lifting up women here, right? So Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. That's the posture of the disciple. And obviously in Luke, the women were just as much part of ministry as men. But back to Origen. So he thought that contemplation was not just this sort of sitting, but rather it was seeing differently. Seeing with the eyes of faith. Seeing the invisible God at work. Seeing and hearing and experiencing the Spirit as it works through each of us to restore all things, reconcile all things, as Paul writes today to the Colossians. So I think the message of our passage today is not that the work of Martha is useless and it should be condemned, but rather to see our work not according to its immediate and evident results, but rather to see it in the light of eternity, perhaps, as we might say. To see it in its goodness, and to do it because it's the right thing to do. Most of you know that we're obsessed nowadays with measuring things, right? To try to see is this really working? We're going to have this measurement, like this metric, and golly, in medicine, it's horrible, right? Like I got to, this percentage of patients, or that, it's just all on and on. And many places, as you know, the measurement is what? It's money, right? We've got to come up with some measurement or metric to see how productive we are. And then we take that measurement, this is the problem, we take that measurement as the value of the work that we're doing. And many times, even worse, we take that measurement and metric as the value of ourselves. Martha, Martha. Those words are the words of the Good Shepherd, who calls us each by name and who values us in our uniqueness, values our contributions, however large or however small. And they call to us, and they seek us out when we are alone. Another commentator, a little bit more recent commentator on the passage, thought maybe what the problem that Martha was having was that she was trying to do everything by herself, and she became overwhelmed. She was doing this good work of hospitality, and she thought she needed to do it all alone, and then became overwhelmed. I think that what Merton is telling Forrest and what this passage is telling us is that we are, in fact, not alone. That the world can seem like it's falling apart. That our moods can become bleak. That we begin to feel that we're too small to do anything about it. We're too powerless. But perhaps that is the conversion that we're being called to change our vision and our attitude. Our attitude that we want to measure ourselves by the wrong ruler, by the wrong measuring rod. It's not the results, it's the goodness of our actions. It's not for us to know the end. It's only for us to continue the journey and to pass the torch when we have completed our part. Amen.